Chapter 1. The Apex Predator. The planet of Talathar was far from ordinary. Its vast jungles, shrouded in mist and dense foliage, were home to creatures so vicious and alien that few could even imagine what roamed beneath its towering trees. The atmosphere was thick, laden with the humidity and moisture that made breathing difficult for unprepared visitors. Still, it was a place worth exploring, as the planet was rich with resources and untapped potential at least. That's what the Intergalactic Explorers Guild had claimed when they set out to map its secrets. Lena Varvis, a galactic biologist, had arrived on Talathar with her research team not long ago. Her mission was simple: catalog and document the flora and fauna that made up the planet's unique ecosystem, particularly the predatory creatures that were known to rule the food chain here. Of course, she wasn't alone. A handful of scientists, engineers, and a security team made the journey as well. They had hoped for some new discovery, something that would add to humanity's growing knowledge of the cosmos. What they hadn't expected, however, was just how dangerous the apex predators of Talathar truly were. She crouched behind a thick mass of vines and crimson ferns, her eyes locked on a giant creature moving through the jungle. It was massive, easily the size of a small cargo ship, with sleek, scaled skin, a long serpentine tail, and massive, razor-sharp claws. This was one of the apex predators, a creature whose ferocity and strength were the stuff of legends. No one had managed to observe one in its natural habitat until now. The creature moved with grace despite its size, its thick muscles rippling as it glided through the underbrush, sniffing the air for its next meal. Lena felt a thrill of fear mixed with exhilaration. This was the kind of discovery that could change everything. No one had ever documented these predators in their natural habitat. The guild would pay handsomely for this. She activated the recording device built into her suit, zooming in on the creature. Its eyes, pale and almost luminescent, scanned the area, but Lena knew it couldn't see her. The predator was too focused on the scents in the air, following something. Perhaps prey. Or another predator. The sharp, snapping sound of a branch breaking caught Lena's attention. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. A movement behind her, not the predator, but something much closer, spun her around. She gasped. Standing in front of her, clad in full survival gear, was a human soldier, a man she hadn't seen in the chaos of their initial landing. His name was Jack Fletcher, and he was the team's only line of defense against the dangers lurking in the jungles of Talathar. But Lena's eyes didn't stay on Jack for long. What shocked her was the sight that followed him. A body, a large, bloody heap of flesh, scaled and torn, was slung over Jack's shoulder. It was the apex predator, the same creature she had been observing. "What the hell is that?" she gasped, stepping back. Jack didn't look at her immediately. He dropped the corpse onto the ground with a heavy thud, dust rising from the jungle floor. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood, and Lena could see the huge claws had been neatly dissected, each one cut cleanly at the joints. "That's our dinner, Dr. Varvis," Jack said flatly, finally meeting her gaze. "You wouldn't believe how hard it was to catch this one. He's not as tough as the legends say." Lena stared at him, her mind racing. She couldn't quite comprehend what she was seeing. The apex predator, the very creature that should have been the top of the food chain, feared by every other life form on the planet, was lying dead before her, its once imposing form reduced to little more than meat. "What do you mean, dinner? This is an apex predator. You can't just kill it." Lena's voice broke with the shock. She took a step back, still trying to make sense of what was unfolding before her. Jack didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pulled out a long blade, a specialized cutting tool, and began stripping away the scales from the beast's carcass with practiced ease. "You'd be surprised, Dr. Varvis," Jack said finally. "I've hunted a lot of things in my time. Never thought I'd be hunting these things. But sometimes you've got to do what you've got to do. And this one, he's perfect." Lena watched, frozen, as Jack efficiently removed the meat from the predator's body, carving it with precision. It wasn't just his hunting skills that intrigued her, though. It was the way he seemed so unfazed by it all, like it was just another ordinary task. She had to remind herself that this was his job. He was the survival expert for the mission. But there was something unsettling about the way he handled the creature, as though he had done this many times before. Lena's breath caught in her throat when she realized what she was witnessing. Jack wasn't just killing an apex predator for survival. He was treating it like a meal, as though it were no more dangerous than the animals back home on Earth. "What is it that you're not telling me, Jack?" Lena asked, her tone turning colder, her scientific mind picking apart the pieces of the puzzle. "Why are you so calm about this?" Jack paused his movements, lifting his eyes from the carcass to meet hers. There was something about the way he looked at her, something almost knowing, as though he understood the question before she even asked it. "Because, Dr. Varvis, the truth is, these things aren't as untouchable as everyone believes." His voice dropped to a more serious tone. "They're not predators, they're just animals, like the rest of us. They're good at hunting, sure, but they can be outsmarted. And when you're out here long enough, you learn how to turn the tables." Lena watched, her gaze flickering from his eyes to the beast. There was an unsettling finality to his words, as if he had seen and experienced things that went beyond simple survival. But the truth was, Jack's confidence and actions seemed to be backed by experience, something Lena couldn't ignore. She had assumed, like everyone else, that the apex predator was invincible. And yet, here Jack was, standing over the beast's carcass as if it were no more dangerous than a hunting trophy. A mix of awe and fear settled over her. She had underestimated him, and now, she wasn't sure if that was a mistake or if he had just proven something that defied everything she knew about this alien world. Chapter 2. The Blood of the Jungle. Lena stood frozen, her gaze fixed on the carcass of the apex predator sprawled before her, its once terrifying form now reduced to little more than meat and bone. The faint glow from the canopy above filtered through the mist, casting a soft light on the alien creature's leathery skin. She had spent weeks cataloging the natural wonders of Talithar, but she had never thought she would be standing in front of the very thing the local legends spoke of in hushed tones, the most dangerous beast the planet had to offer. But this wasn't a typical predator. It wasn't hunting or struggling for survival. No, it was dead murdered, stripped clean of its pride, its power, and its majesty. Lena turned slowly, the words Jack had just spoken still echoing in her mind. They weren't just casual statements. They felt like revelations, the kind that stirred something deep within her. She was a scientist, someone who thrived on knowledge and discovery, yet there was something about Jack's words, the way he spoke so casually, that made her question everything she thought she knew. "It's just an animal, Lena, just like everything else out here. We can't give it more credit than that." His voice was calm, practical, as if this were just another day on an ordinary hunting expedition. But Lena wasn't so sure. She glanced up at him, her eyes narrowing. "How can you be so certain about that?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "You killed one of the most dangerous creatures on this planet with... What? A knife? You're saying it's just an animal?" Jack paused, looking at her, his brow furrowing slightly as if he hadn't fully processed her question. Then he let out a soft chuckle. "It's all about understanding the beast, Dr. Varvis. The moment you start respecting it too much, that's when it'll end you. And trust me, on a planet like this, you can't afford to give anything more respect than it deserves. Not the predators. Not the jungle." Lena blinked, her mind still racing. She had seen Jack in action during the mission. Sharp, decisive, and always calculating. But now, standing over the remains of the apex predator, he seemed almost too comfortable, too in control. "What do you mean by that?" she pressed, her scientific curiosity overpowering her initial shock. "You seem to have a different take on the situation. You're calm about it. You don't seem afraid." "How?" Jack's expression softened, the hint of a grin tugging at the corner of his lips. "When you've been out here long enough, Lena, you learn that fear is a luxury you can't afford." His eyes flickered over to the jungle around them, a glint of something wild and untamed behind his calm demeanor. "Fear doesn't help you survive. Understanding does. These creatures? They're no different than anything else. They've got instincts, sure, but instincts are easy to trick." He wiped his knife clean with a rag, the smooth motion seemingly effortless, as if the world around them weren't in danger of falling apart at any moment. A war was raging between the Korsian Empire and the Resistance. The galaxy's future was in jeopardy. But here, in the jungle of Talithar, Jack was talking about survival in a way that was almost philosophical, as if he were not just a soldier, but a man who had learned the deepest secrets of the wild. You can't just kill the beast. You have to understand its rhythms, its movement, It's patterns, he continued, looking down at the now half-stripped carcass. You've got to get inside its head, just like anything else. And if you don't, you get eaten. Simple as that. Lena was quiet for a long time, absorbing his words, but her mind was already ticking. What he said made sense, but it was still hard to fully accept. Apex predators had always been considered the untouchable kings of the jungle. Their strength, agility, and cunning were legendary. Yet Jack, this soldier, this enigmatic figure, had taken down the ultimate hunter as if it were just another obstacle to overcome. So you've been hunting these creatures? Lena finally asked, her voice quieter this time. She couldn't help the curiosity that began to grow inside her. Why? What's your reason for all of this? What do you get from killing a creature like this? Jack didn't respond immediately. His eyes drifted back to the dead predator, his gaze softening for a moment, but then he snapped back to reality, as if trying to push the thoughts away. I'm here to do my job, Lena. He shrugged, his tone returning to its practical, no-nonsense edge. Same as you. Same as everyone else. We're all here to survive. Killing the apex predator? It's a reminder that we can take control of our destiny. Before Lena could ask more, a soft chime from her communication device cut through the tension. She glanced down and quickly read the message. We've got incoming. The Corsians are closer than we thought. Her heart skipped a beat. This was it. The Empire's forces were closing in. The team had to move, and fast. We can't stay here, Jack. We need to go. She turned to him, her face serious. The urgency in her voice was unmistakable. We need to leave now. Jack didn't hesitate. With one last glance at the carcass of the creature, he grabbed his weapon and made his way to the exit of the jungle clearing, signaling for Lena to follow. The tension had shifted, no longer about the creature or the jungle but about survival and escape. Let's get to the extraction point, Dr. Varvis. You're going to see what I mean by survival. We need to fight, or we'll become just another meal for something worse. His voice was grave as he turned his back on the apex predator and strode forward. Lena followed, her mind still reeling from everything she had just witnessed. But the reality of the situation, the danger closing in around them, was too urgent to dwell on the predator's death or Jack's strange behavior any longer. They had one chance to get out alive, and everything would depend on how well they fought not just the enemy, but the jungle itself. Chapter 3. The Hidden Struggle. The dense jungle of Talathar seemed to press in on Lena from all sides. The trees loomed overhead, their roots snaking through the earth like twisted fingers, and the air was thick with humidity and the constant hum of alien insects. She followed Jack closely, trying to keep up as he moved with swift, calculated steps, navigating through the labyrinth of alien flora. His focus was unyielding, his every move efficient, but as the minutes passed, a sense of dread began to settle over Lena. There was something off about this jungle, something she hadn't quite realized before. The predators were more than just creatures of instinct. The jungle itself felt alive, in a way that went beyond natural evolution. It felt like something had shifted. Jack didn't seem concerned. He moved like he'd been through this before many times. Lena couldn't help but wonder how much he really knew about Talathar and its dangers. The apex predator, the jungle, and now the Empire's forces closing in, it all felt like too much to handle. Her mind raced, but she shoved her concerns aside as the sound of distant engines caught her attention. The Corsian fleet was near. Lena's heart skipped a beat as she realized just how much time they had left. Jack was right. They needed to fight, and they needed to fight now. We're almost there, Jack's voice cut through her thoughts. He didn't even glance back at her, his gaze fixed ahead. He was completely at ease, his movements smooth despite the terrain. We need to be quick, he added, his voice low but commanding. They broke through a thicket of overgrown vines, and up ahead, Lena saw the silhouette of the extraction point, a cleared area near the jungle's edge, where a drop ship awaited. But as they neared the clearing, a sudden rustling in the underbrush made Lena freeze. Jack's hand went to the sidearm at his hip, but he didn't pull it out. Instead, he signaled for silence. The air around them grew still, and Lena's breath caught in her throat as she watched the foliage shift, almost as though something were watching them. A low, guttural growl rumbled from the jungle floor, followed by the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the trees. Without warning, A flash of black and green darted through the underbrush. A shadow, followed by another. Lena barely had time to react before the creatures emerged. The Cerathians, large, sleek, reptilian beasts with glowing amber eyes and serrated scales, appeared. Their fangs were long and sharp, and they moved with the fluid grace of predators who had long since mastered the art of ambush. These were not the apex predators, but they were close enough to make Lena's blood run cold. Lena instinctively backed up, her eyes wide as she noticed the creatures focus on them. They were being hunted. Jack acted without hesitation. His blaster was out in an instant, aimed at the nearest Cerathian. The energy pulse hit the creature square in the chest, knocking it back, but not without a snarl of defiance. The creature was still alive barely. Its amber eyes glowed menacingly as it screeched and lunged forward, narrowly missing Jack. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she scrambled to follow his lead. She wasn't trained for this. She wasn't equipped for close combat, but she had no choice. "Get down!" Jack barked at her, his voice urgent. Lena ducked behind a fallen tree just as one of the Cerathians made a leap for her. It missed, but its claws scraped across her suit, leaving a deep gouge. She winced, but there was no time to dwell on it. She had to move. Jack fired again, his aim precise, striking the Cerathian in the head. The creature went down, its body collapsing with an unceremonious thud. "One down, two more to go," Jack muttered, his eyes scanning the area. But the remaining two creatures weren't backing down. They were circling, eyes glinting with hunger. They weren't just looking for a fight, they were looking for food. And Lena had become their target. Jack moved with purpose, keeping low to the ground as he advanced, one creature in his sights. Lena hesitated for a split second, but then the second Cerathian lunged at her from behind the tree. Without thinking, she jumped sideways, barely dodging the creature's jaws. She landed hard on the ground, pain shooting up her arm, but she didn't stop. Her heart raced as she rolled into a crouch and grabbed a tactical grenade from her belt. It was an instinct, a reflex more than anything. She tossed it directly into the path of the advancing predator, and before she could second-guess herself, the explosion went off, a powerful burst of energy that sent the Cerathian flying backward. The creature let out a howling screech, but it wasn't dead. The blast had damaged it, but it was still alive, and angrier than ever. "Nice work, Dr. Varvis." Jack's voice came through her comm unit. His tone wasn't mocking, there was real approval in it. But there was no time for celebration. With the Cerathians temporarily stunned, Jack moved in and finished the job, taking down both remaining predators with 2 precise shots to their skulls. The jungle fell eerily silent as the bodies of the creatures hit the ground with a dull thud. Lena was breathing hard, her hands still shaking. The tension hadn't completely gone. They weren't out of danger yet, but she felt a slight sense of relief wash over her. "You all right?" Jack's voice was calm but concerned as he approached her. His dark eyes scanned her for injuries, his expression softening for a split second before returning to its usual hardened focus. Lena nodded, but her voice came out a little shaky. "Yeah, I think so." She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. What the hell was that? Cerathians. They're not the worst thing on this planet, but they're definitely not friendly. Jack glanced at the creatures' bodies, then looked up toward the clearing ahead. "We need to move. The Empire won't wait for us to finish our wildlife tour." Lena had never felt more alive in her life. The tension from their skirmish with the Cerathians was still coursing through her veins, but there was no time to process. The Empire was still closing in. As they sprinted toward the extraction point, Lena couldn't shake the image of the beasts lying at their feet, and of Jack, so composed, so quick to act. There was so much about him that she didn't understand, but one thing was certain: he was more than just a soldier. In the jungle, it was just as dangerous as it was beautiful. Talithar was not a place for the faint of heart. Chapter 4. The Final Stand. The air was thick with tension as Lena and Jack moved swiftly through the dense underbrush of the jungle, their bodies tense from the recent battle. The Cerathians were down, but their threat was far from the only danger they faced. The Empire's forces were closing in, and time was no longer a luxury. Every second counted. The clearing ahead where the drop ship waited seemed so close yet miles away. The jungle around them seemed to stretch on endlessly, its creaking branches and swarming insects a constant reminder of how alive Talithar truly was. But this wasn't just a paradise. It was a prison for those who weren't prepared to face the ferocity of its creatures. Lena's heart raced, but she didn't have time to think about anything other than the task ahead. Jack was leading them, calm and efficient, as though the jungle itself didn't faze him. The urgency of their situation had ignited something in him, something that burned with an inner drive. He was more than just a soldier. She had seen it in him during the fight with the apex predator, and now, in the face of these other dangers, she could see the quiet strength in his every move. They reached the edge of the jungle, where the clearing opened up into a wide space. The dropship was stationed just ahead, its engines humming quietly as the crew readied it for takeoff. But Lena could feel the danger creeping closer. She didn't need to see it to know she could feel it in the air. A kind of oppressive weight that only came when death was near. "We're almost there," Jack muttered, scanning the area. But Lena's heart sank as the unmistakable sound of Corsian engines echoed through the trees. The Empire was almost upon them. They weren't alone in the jungle anymore. Their final stand had arrived. Lena barely had time to react before a Corsian scout emerged from the foliage, weapon raised and aimed straight at them. His figure was tall, a silhouette against the mist, his armor gleaming under the light of the fading sun. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected them to be so close. She hadn't expected them to have found their trail so soon. "Take cover," Jack shouted, shoving Lena behind a large boulder. The moment his words left his lips, the first energy blast tore through the air, slamming into the ground just feet from where they were standing. The explosion sent dirt and rocks flying, and Lena was thrown backward, landing hard on the ground. Before she could regain her senses, Jack was on the move, his gun raised, and he fired a series of shots that sent the Corsian scout staggering backward. The scout took cover, returning fire with an intensity that mirrored their desperation. Lena scrambled to her feet, trying to get her bearings. She felt her pulse quicken as she realized the enormity of what was happening. The Empire had cornered them. The jungle, their only advantage, was no longer a safe haven. They had no choice but to fight their way out. "We need to move, Lena," Jack barked as he grabbed her arm, pulling her along toward the drop ship. His words were sharp, urgent. They couldn't afford to waste any time. But as they sprinted toward the ship, they were met with another wave of Corsian soldiers, more prepared and heavily armed. The trap was closing in. Lena's breath hitched in her chest as she scanned the incoming threat. Her mind raced. She had to do something. She couldn't just stand back and let Jack face this alone. She wasn't a soldier, but she was resourceful and she could contribute, somehow. Without thinking, Lena reached into her pack and grabbed a small plasma grenade, risky weapon, but it would do the job. She hurled it toward the group of Corsian soldiers, praying it would give them the opening they needed. The grenade detonated with a blinding flash, sending soldiers tumbling backward, their cries muffled by the explosion. "Nice shot, Dr. Varvis," Jack called out, a grin flashing across his face despite the dire situation. With the opening provided by Lena's grenade, Jack led them toward the drop ship, their path now clear. The remaining soldiers regrouped quickly, but they were too late. Jack and Lena reached the ship, and the hatch slammed shut behind them. Inside, the crew was already preparing for takeoff. They had seconds, no more than that. Jack took the pilot's seat, his hands steady on the controls, as Lena strapped into the seat next to him. "Hold on, Lena. It's gonna get bumpy." Jack's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it now. He was all business, his instincts sharp as ever. The ship's engines roared to life, and Lena felt the familiar vibration under her feet as they lifted off the ground. But as they ascended, the sky above them suddenly darkened, the low hum of the Corsian fleet filling the air. The Empire wasn't going to let them go that easily. "We're not out of the woods yet," Jack muttered, his eyes scanning the readouts. "They'll be on us in seconds. Get ready." Lena gripped the seat, her heart pounding in her chest. The Corsian ships were hot on their tail, closing in quickly. The sky above was filled with the sound of their engines. It was only a matter of time before they were caught. But then, just as she thought they were done for, a deep rumble shook the ship, and a pulse of energy surged through the air. The Ceradix-class warship, the Resistance's final weapon, emerged from the clouds above, its massive form dwarfing the Corsian fleet. "What the hell is that?" Lena whispered, her eyes wide with shock. The cavalry, Jack said with a grin. It's time we turn the tables. With the Ceratix-class warship on their side, the Empire's forces stood no chance. A barrage of plasma cannons and laser beams slammed into the Corsian ships, disabling them with surgical precision. The massive ships were quickly disabled, their engines flickering as they spiraled into a crash landing below. Lena watched in awe as the Ceratix tore through the Corsian fleet, their firepower unmatched. The Empire's forces were finally broken, their pride shattered by the might of the Resistance's secret weapon. As the chaos settled, Lena turned to Jack, who had finally relaxed into his seat. He looked at her, his face softer now, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. You did good, Lena. You saved us. Lena smiled, still in shock from the whirlwind of events. Her hands were shaking, but she was alive. They were alive. They had survived, against all odds. And as the Ceratix warship carried them to safety, Lena realized something profound. The fight wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about trust. Survival was easier when you had someone to fight alongside. And Jack had become more than just a teammate. He had become her protector, her ally, and maybe something more. She glanced over at him, and for the first time, the weight of the battle seemed to lift. They had won. For now, anyway. The stars were endless in the vastness of space, but for the first time in a long while, Lena felt a spark of hope. The war wasn't over, but they had survived, and for that, they would fight.